At 9:07 that morning, the notary's examination lamp made two signatures look almost identical. Almost. The lamp sat low over a narrow laminate table, throwing white light across Evelyn's steel Taylor square. A crystal clasp, one alteration receipt, and the bank authorization carrying my full name. The office smelt faintly of copier heat and whatever lemon cleaner they used before opening. Above us, one ceiling panel made a thin electrical hum that kept slipping in and out of pitch. I'm recording this at 3:14 in the morning because I still cannot sleep, and because saying the sequence aloud is the only way I can keep Celeste's version from swallowing the small details. There were 9 core pieces in my alteration tote, along with supporting records that documented where each one came from. 6 original pickup receipts that I had signed in front of customers and coworkers. 1 high-resolution image from the bank. 1 recorded confirmation call from the celebration lender. 1 voicemail from my aunt. 9 pieces. By the time we left that room, 1 would stop the settlement, 1 would make my father understand what his loyalty had actually cost him, and 1 would tear apart the 2 people who had spent months agreeing that I was the problem. But at 9:07, none of that had happened yet. Celeste sat across from me, smoothing the cuff of her anniversary gown beneath a clear garment cover. She was speaking to the notary in that gentle, educated voice she used in her online videos, explaining that I had a documented habit of withdrawing consent whenever money made me emotionally overwhelmed. The notary did not react. She simply checked the identification cards again. And, look, when somebody from your own family puts your name on a legal document and the mark is convincing enough to fool a bank employee, but your own injured hand knows it never made that movement, what happens inside you first? Do you get angry? Do you go numb? Or do you immediately start looking for some explanation that allows the person who did it to remain the person you thought they were? I spent weeks trying to find that explanation. The crystal clasp beneath the lamp caught a hard point of light. The same clasp had been digging into my thumb the previous afternoon while I knelt beside Celeste's chair in the conservatory's vendor preparation room. Cold tile under both knees. Pins between my lips. 4 people standing close enough to watch my hands work. Celeste had noticed the loose clasp while reviewing the placement of the floral towers. She called me over without pausing her conversation and held out her sleeve as though I worked for the venue. The gown cost more than 3 months of my take-home pay. It had layers of ivory satin beneath a sheer outer sleeve crowded with crystals that had been applied for photographs, not movement. The thread was too light for the weight. Anyone who had worked on formal wear for more than a week could see that. She introduced me to the notary, who had stopped by to collect preliminary documents, as her gifted little sister who loved small projects and felt most useful when she was making things for other people. Not a tailor. Not the woman who had spent 12 hours that day correcting warehouse gowns under timed labor tickets. The family helper. I pushed the needle through the damaged loop. My wrist caught halfway through the turn, right where the old scar tightened beneath the skin. It always did that. A seam ripper had slipped during my first month working alterations, leaving a pale crescent near the base of my thumb. Nothing dramatic, no heroic injury, just a small permanent hitch that showed up whenever I rotated my wrist too far. Celeste kept talking above me. She told the vendors that the ceremony was not simply an anniversary party. It was a healing milestone for our father after retirement. She said the family had chosen abundance over fear. Then she asked whether the floral lighting could be made warmer because ordinary white light photographed as emotionally cold. My Aunt Rhea stood beside a tablet covered in vendor schedules and said I would probably demand a receipt for the electricity. Everyone laughed, except my father. Dennis was 6 feet away, filling the industrial garment steamer. His shoulders lifted when the laughter began, then settled when he realized no one expected him to answer. He checked the water level twice, wiped a dry spot from the handle, asked whether the extension cord created a trip hazard. That was how he left a room without moving. The steamer hissed. The ceiling panel in the notary office answered with its thin electrical whine. Across the table, Celeste was still explaining me. She told the notary I had been enthusiastic about supporting the ceremony until attention shifted away from me. She spoke with controlled sadness, as though this was painful information she had been forced to disclose for everyone's protection. My father sat near the open office door with his hands flat on his knees. Rhea arranged vendor invoices beside her handbag. Nobody looked at the authorization beneath the lamp. Not yet. Basically, the family had spent years training themselves not to look directly at anything that would require them to say no to Celeste. My workday began in the basement alteration department of a discount bridal warehouse. No windows, 2 rows of industrial machines, fluorescent strips that flattened every color until ivory, cream, pearl, and white all looked like the same tired gray. Each garment arrived with a printed labor allowance. 22 minutes to shorten a lining, 40 minutes to taper a bodice, 12 minutes to replace a zipper hook that had been installed incorrectly at the factory. Corrections beyond that allowance did not make the dress easier. They only made the ticket less valuable. Some evenings, I would finish a 12-hour shift, drive home, and sit at my own machine to repair neighborhood uniforms, funeral suits, prom dresses, or restaurant aprons for cash. My home machine had a bent presser foot. The replacement cost $38 before shipping, so I did not replace it. For 3 weeks, I used my left thumbnail to hold the seam allowance away from the warped metal while the needle moved. By the end of each night, a narrow groove remained beneath the nail. I would press the thumb into cold water, wait for the ache to settle, then open the household bills. Property tax installment, gas balance, supplemental insurance for Dennis. A utility notice printed in red because Celeste had promised to submit the payment and forgotten. You have to understand, I was not staying in that house because I enjoyed being needed. I was saving to leave. The condominium account held $26,800. Down payment, closing reserve, inspection fees. Enough to give me 1 bedroom, a narrow balcony, and a door that belonged to me. I had been approved in principle for a modest unit above a pharmacy on Waverly Street. Nothing glamorous. The kitchen cabinets had chipped corners. The bedroom window faced a loading alley. The bathroom fan sounded like a box of screws turning inside a dryer. I loved it. Dennis had installed floors for 37 years, so he promised to attend the inspection. He said he could tell whether moisture had reached the underlayment by the sound beneath his boots. At 2:11 that afternoon, the inspector and I stood inside the empty living room waiting for him. At 2:26, I called. At 2:38, Dennis sent a message saying Celeste needed him for an important family obligation. The inspector kept moving. He tested the outlets, measured moisture near the bathroom threshold, pointed out a loose balcony latch. I followed him from room to room, holding a clipboard that kept slipping against my damp palm. When we reached the flooring transition near the kitchen, he asked whether my father was still coming. I said no. That was all. No speech, no breakdown. Just one word while a stranger bent down to examine the place where my father had promised to stand. The sharp chemical smell of hairspray pulled me from that empty condominium into Celeste's social media video that evening. Dennis was seated beneath hanging glass lights at a dessert studio. He raised a crystal spoon toward the camera while Celeste leaned against his shoulder. Behind them were 6 plated samples for the anniversary reception. The caption read, "Showing up for what matters." Honestly, I watched it 3 times. Not because I misunderstood, because part of me kept expecting the words to change. They did not. The condominium inspection acknowledgement sat beside me on the kitchen table with my signature at the bottom. The final curve of my surname broke slightly where my wrist tightened. It had done that on every form I had signed since I was 20. Dennis came home carrying a box of leftover cake samples and tried to explain that Celeste had been under pressure. He said there would be other inspections, other condominiums, other chances. Then he asked whether I wanted the lemon slice before Rhea took it. That was his specialty, turning the worst moment of your week into a question about leftovers. Cold metal pressed against my palm. Evelyn's Taylor's Square had been hanging from a nail above my home machine. 2 pounds of steel, nicks along one edge, chalk buried inside the engraved measurements no matter how often I wiped it clean. Evelyn Price had owned the first alteration shop willing to hire me when I was 16. She never praised a crooked hem to spare my feelings. She placed the square across the fabric, showed me the difference, and made me measure again. One night after closing, I had cut a formal skirt nearly half an inch short on one side. I expected her to take the work away from me. Instead, she moved the steel square into my hands and waited. Fabric could absorb pressure, she used to say. Measurements could not absorb a lie. The memory came back while Dennis placed the cake box in the refrigerator and told me not to let one missed appointment damage the family. A sharp pop from a crystal being pressed into place brought me back beneath Celeste's chair. The vendor room was warmer now. My neck had started to cramp. An itchy manufacturer's label rubbed the back of my collar each time I leaned forward. Celeste continued discussing imported table linens. She said ordinary cotton looked emotionally flat in photographs. I thought about the $38 presser foot. She thought about fabric that would be used once. That was the whole family arrangement in 2 numbers. $45,400 for 6 hours of photographs. $38 I could not safely take from the account meant to get me out. At the time, though, I did not know the full amount. I only knew something had begun to feel wrong around my name. After I repaired the clasp, I carried the trimmed thread and fabric scraps toward a disposal bin near the calligrapher's table. A thick sample card had fallen face down between strips of satin and discarded backing paper. I picked it up because the cardstock was firm enough to reuse as a guide for small button placements. The front contained examples of gold lettering for the anniversary place settings. The reverse side contained my name, Mara Vance. Again, Mara Vance. Again. At least 11 attempts. Some too large, some leaning too far right, some with the capital M corrected in a darker line. The last 4 looked very close to mine, close enough that the hairs along my forearm lifted before I understood why. Every copied version moved smoothly through the final curve of Vance. No hesitation, no release of pressure, no tiny interruption where my wrist refused to turn cleanly. I stood beside the fabric bin holding that sample card while Celeste discussed lighting with the vendors behind me. The room smelled of cut flowers, steam, hairspray, and warm electrical cords. My stomach tightened so hard that I had to press my tongue against the back of my teeth. And here's the thing. I still did not accuse her. I told myself she might have been practicing names for place cards. I told myself the calligrapher might have requested examples. I told myself there had to be an ordinary reason my sister had written my legal signature repeatedly on the back of a discarded card. That was the explanation I spent weeks trying to build. It failed. Before I left the vendor room, I sealed the sample card inside a clear alteration sleeve, wrote the date and location across the flap, and photographed both sides. I kept the original untouched after that. The examination lamp clicked as the notary adjusted its angle. Present morning again. Celeste stopped smoothing her cuff. Dennis shifted in his chair. Rhea checked the open doorway as though she expected someone more important to arrive. The notary placed one finger near the disputed authorization without touching the signature itself. She asked whether I was formally challenging the authorization attributed to me. My scar tightened before I spoke. The 6 genuine receipts waited inside my tote. The lender's recording remained saved in 2 locations. Rhea's voicemail was time-stamped. Birch was no longer where Celeste could move him without notice. For the first time in 9 years, there was nothing left in that house that required me to pretend. Yes. The bank image reached my phone at 4:43 in the afternoon. I was guiding an ivory satin cuff beneath the needle when the notification appeared across the cracked upper corner of the screen. The machine was running at half speed because the fabric had been cut too close to the seam allowance, and one wrong pull would have dragged the edge beneath the blade. My left hand kept the satin flat. My right hand lifted the phone. The image opened sideways. A white authorization form, black printing, my address, my account number, my full legal name at the bottom. The signature looked right. That was the first problem. The M leaned forward at the same angle I used. The middle letters compressed slightly, the way mine did when I wrote quickly. The final stroke curved underneath the surname with the exact kind of confidence people expect from someone signing her own name. But my wrist did not recognize it. The tendons beneath the scar tightened so sharply that my fingers curled away from the screen. My thumb locked against my palm. The cuff kept moving. 1 second, maybe less. The satin edge drifted toward the blade. I hit the stop pedal with the side of my shoe. The needle froze halfway down. A loose thread trembled beneath it. My breathing came through my nose in small, dry pulls. There was no pressure break in the final curve. None. I enlarged the image until the pixels softened. The line remained smooth from the A in Mara through the final sweep of Vance. Whoever wrote it had copied the shape, but their hand had moved through the surname without the pause mine had made for 14 years. The authorization amount sat 3 lines above the signature. Withdrawal authorized, $26,800. Below it was a date, April 17. At 11:26 that morning, my employee time record showed me inside the bridal warehouse basement. I remembered the shift because a woman had arrived early for a fitting and cried when the zipper on her mother's dress would not close. I had spent 40 minutes rebuilding the side seam while my supervisor stood beside the clock. I had not been at the bank. I had not signed the form. The needle remained suspended above the cuff. Cold air from the ceiling vent moved across the sweat at the back of my neck. Somewhere behind me, a coworker tore brown packing tape from a dispenser. The sound snapped through the room, and my shoulders jerked hard enough that the phone nearly slipped out of my hand. I opened the account summary. The down payment account showed a balance of $43.12. 3 new consumer accounts appeared beneath my credit profile. $7,200, $6,400, $5,000, $18,600. Add the withdrawal, $45,400. I stared at those 2 totals until they stopped looking like money and became time. 12-hour shifts, bent presser foot, utility notices, Dennis's insurance premium, the condominium inspection I had attended alone, $45,400 for Celeste's 6-hour anniversary production, $38 I had refused to spend on a replacement machine part. My stomach pulled so tight that a sour taste rose into my mouth. The muscles in my jaw started clicking. I tried to swallow and could not do it on the first attempt. The supervisor called my ticket number from across the room. I lowered the phone. My hand would not flatten. The scar had drawn every finger inward, as if the tendons were trying to protect themselves from a movement they had never made. Inside my tote was the acrylic needle case Celeste had given me that morning. It was translucent pink with a gold snap that would not stay closed. Across the lid, in white lettering, were the words, "Do what you love." The price sticker was still attached underneath. $6.49. She had pulled it from an anniversary vendor's gift bag and placed it in my hand while I repaired the hem of her gown. She said she wanted me to have something that honored my creativity. Then she told me the family needed flexibility from everyone. $6.49 for my creativity? $45,400 from my name. Look, I know some people imagine that the first response to something like this is rage. Maybe for some people it is. Mine was bargaining. I stood beside that industrial machine trying to invent an explanation that would preserve the person who had done it. Maybe the bank had attached the wrong image. Maybe Dennis had misunderstood an old joint account form. Maybe Celeste had planned to return the money before I noticed. Maybe the 3 credit accounts were temporary. Maybe the amount on the screen did not mean what it plainly meant. My body knew before I did. The wrist had already given its answer. I sent the bank image to my personal email, then to a second storage account. My thumb hovered over the original message. For several seconds, I thought about deleting it, not because I doubted the signature, because I knew what would happen when I brought it home. And I need to ask this plainly. When a document is sitting in your hand proving that a sibling, parent, or family favorite used your identity, what did your body do during that first hour? Did you shake? Did you start apologizing to the person who hurt you? Did you spend that hour trying to prove you were not the kind of family scapegoat who would destroy everyone over money? I did. I rehearsed a calm voice during the entire drive home. By the time I entered the kitchen, I had reduced the situation to 3 sentences. The authorization is not mine. The accounts are not mine. We need to call the bank. Dennis was standing near the counter with the industrial garment steamer beside him. Celeste sat at the table with her laptop open, editing captions for the anniversary video. Ria was sorting vendor receipts into categories. Birch slept beneath the window. I placed the bank image on the table. Celeste looked at it for less than 2 seconds. Then she looked at me. I hear you. No. Look at the signature. I am looking. That is not mine. Ria made a small sound through her nose. Celeste closed the laptop halfway. You're activated. The account is empty. Mara, $26,800 is gone. Dennis reached for the steamer handle. Celeste kept her voice low. This is exactly why I wanted us to discuss the financial bridge after the celebration. There was no bridge. You agreed to support the family. I did not sign that. Ria pushed one vendor receipt into alignment with another. Here we go. I pointed at the final curve of the signature. Dad, look at this. Dennis rolled the steamer closer to the table. The front wheel caught against a grout line. Dad! He pressed the pedal. Steam burst from the head with a hard mechanical hiss. Celeste waited until the sound faded. What you are calling theft was temporary resource redistribution inside a shared support system. It is my down payment. That language is possessive. It is my account. You are making ownership more important than Dad's recovery. Dennis pressed the pedal again. Hiss. The room disappeared behind a white cloud for half a second. Dennis, I said, she used your tax drawer to get my information. He stared at the steamer head. I can't think with everyone upset. No one is shouting. Hiss. Please turn that off. I'm trying to help with the dress. The dress is not here. He looked toward the empty doorway, as if the gown might appear and prove him useful. Celeste folded her hands. Her nails were painted the same pale pink as the anniversary invitations. Mara, your nervous system is interpreting shared family resources as personal property. My throat closed so fast that the next word scraped on the way out. My name is personal. Ria laughed once. Not loudly. That made it worse. She said a basement seamstress had finally decided receipts were a personality. Birch lifted his head. Celeste glanced down at him, then back at me. Western need to talk about whether this environment is still good for him. The sentence arrived in the same voice she used to discuss flower colors. I stopped moving. Celeste controlled the registration account and the microchip profile because Dennis had allowed her to update the household records the year before. I paid the veterinary bills. I ordered the food. I had raised Birch from a puppy, but my name was not listed as the primary contact. Celeste touched the edge of her laptop. He needs stability. If this conflict continues before the ceremony, a calmer household may be healthier. The muscles behind my knees weakened. You would give him away? I said we would make a responsible decision. He is my dog. Dennis pressed the steamer pedal again. Hiss. That sound. I can still hear it when the room is quiet. Every time I asked my father to look at the forged statement, he filled the space with steam. It was not dramatic. He did not defend Celeste in a speech. He did something smaller. He made looking impossible. Rhea started talking about vendor deposits. Celeste interrupted her to say this conversation was becoming unsafe. Dennis asked whether anyone had eaten. Birch stood and came toward me, then stopped when Celeste called his name. My hands had gone cold. The bank image lay between the vendor receipts, one white page among all the other white pages. Nobody touched it. I understood then that a louder argument would only give Celeste more material. She would tell the family I had frightened Dennis, Rhea would repeat it, Dennis would remember only the pressure in his chest and the sound of my voice. Birch would remain attached to an account I did not control. So I picked up the bank image. Celeste watched me. Her face did not look guilty. She looked inconvenienced. I'm going back to work, I said. That is probably best, she answered. The industrial machine at the warehouse was already warm when I returned. A smoke-damaged bridle sleeve waited beneath the task lamp. 612 glass beads had to be removed before the fabric could be cleaned and rebuilt. The customer had counted them during intake because the gown had belonged to her mother. My supervisor had written the number at the top of the ticket. 612. I sat down. The first bead came free with a small twist. Click. The second struck the metal tray. Click. Thread after thread. Bead after bead. The damaged sleeve smelled faintly of old smoke and dry cleaning solvent. Black residue had settled around the bead holes. My fingertips became gray. The task lamp heated the top of my head while the rest of the basement remained cold enough that my toes cramped inside my shoes. At bead 286, I calculated the minimum payment on the first account. Click. At 309, I calculated the second. Click. At 341, I added the deposit required for another rental. Click. The numbers would not stay separate. $45,400. 12-hour shifts. 22-minute tickets. $38 machine part. $43.12 left in the account. My fingers stopped at bead 368. The loosened beads continued rolling from my palm into the tray. Click, click, click. I watched them settle against one another. My supervisor called my ticket number. I heard her. I could not move. The tag at the back of my shirt scratched the same patch of skin each time I breathed. My stomach growled hard enough that the empty metal drawer beneath the table seemed to answer it. A cramp climbed from my wrist into my forearm. Then Evelyn was there. Not really. Just the memory. I was 16 again, standing beside the cutting table after closing. My first formal skirt lay between us, one side nearly half an inch too short. I expected her to take the work away. She placed the steel square in my hands. Cold edge, machine oil, chalk in the engraved lines. She did not call me careless. She did not tell me I was too emotional to understand the measurement. She waited while I checked it myself. For 1 second, I could remember the exact weight of being trusted. Then the memory changed. Celeste taking my credit. Dennis choosing the steamer. Rhea laughing. The person I had spent years trying to earn my place beside had never existed in the way I needed her to. Maybe pieces of her had. A ride home during a storm. A birthday cupcake when we were children. Her hand pulling a loose thread from my collar before school. Small things. Real things. But the sister inside those memories could not be reconciled with the woman who had practiced my signature on the back of a calligraphy card. My hand started shaking again. Not wide movements. A fine tremor. The kind that makes threading a needle impossible. I pressed both palms against the table and waited for the metal to stop vibrating beneath them. It did not. My supervisor called the ticket number a second time. I inhaled through my nose. The breath caught halfway. For a few seconds, I could not remember whether I had paid Dennis's insurance premium that month. Then I remembered I had paid it 3 days before Celeste emptied the account. I sat there looking at those beads and understood how they had used me. Not because I was weak, because I kept completing the work. Every unfinished bill became mine. Every household emergency arrived at my chair. Every time Celeste wanted something expensive, the family searched for a reason my labor or money already belonged to them. They treated my name like leftover material from the cutting table. The math was sitting in the bead tray with everything else. 612 tiny pieces removed by hand while my family kept calling my labor love. In alterations, a seam can only be opened if somebody left enough fabric inside. Once the allowance is cut away, there is nothing left to release. You can pull harder, you can blame the tailor, you can call the garment difficult. The edge is still gone. That was what they had done to me. Taken every spare hour, every saved dollar, every quiet yes, then acted surprised when I had no room left inside my own life. Celeste kept cutting because Dennis kept handing her the scissors. Rhea measured only what she might lose, and I kept trying to repair a structure that had been designed to fit everyone except me. I had mistaken endurance for loyalty, but loyalty does not require one person to disappear into the seam. It does not use her name as material, then accuse her of being selfish when she asks where the fabric went. My hands were shaking because the work was finally visible. Not finished, visible. That was enough to start. My eyes watered. I wiped them with the inside of my elbow because my fingertips were stained with smoke residue. 3 beads rolled onto the floor when I stood. I bent to pick them up and nearly lost my balance. My stomach cramped again. The scar pulled tight beneath my thumb. Nothing about that moment felt powerful. I was hungry. My neck hurt. My face was wet. I still had 244 beads left to remove before I could go home. But the task had changed. I was not going to convince Celeste. I was not going to make Dennis brave. I was not going to defeat Rhea in an argument. Each claim had to be separated. Each document had to be preserved. Each person who had seen or heard something had to be identified. The evidence needed to reach a room where Celeste's voice did not control what counted as consent. I finished the sleeve at 1:18 in the morning. Then I went home, took Evelyn's steel square from the nail, and placed it beside 6 blank scrap labels. My first signature showed the pressure break. So did the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth. Same location, same interruption. Same hand. I aligned the engraved edge of the square beneath them. Then I opened the bank image again. Smooth line. No break. No scar. Celeste had copied my name. She had never carried the hand that made it. At 1:41 in the morning, I signed my name for the 7th time. The first 6 scrap labels were lined up beneath Evelyn's steel square. On every one, the ink weakened at the same point near the end of Vance. Not a dramatic gap. You would miss it if you were looking only at the letters. The pen slowed. Pressure lifted. Then the line continued. My 7th signature did the same thing. I placed the bank image above the labels and moved the square until its engraved edge touched the bottom of each surname. The copied signature flowed through the final curve without interruption. Smooth, even, almost elegant. Too elegant. For 14 years, my wrist had refused to make that line. The old injury was not visible in the finished shape unless you knew where to look. Celeste knew how I formed the capital M. She knew how far I leaned the surname. She knew the long return stroke beneath the last 3 letters. She did not know the tendons inside my hand. I photographed the comparison from directly overhead, then from the left. Then, with the task lamp lowered to show the difference in ink pressure, my cracked phone became hot against my palm. A warning appeared, saying the device needed to cool before I could use the camera again. I set it beside the steel square. For several seconds, I listened to the refrigerator cycle on in the kitchen. Dennis was asleep upstairs. Celeste had left a white garment bag hanging from the pantry door, as though the house were simply preparing for a celebration. Her handwriting covered a note taped to the plastic. Final fitting. Do not touch. My own name sat on the phone beneath it. Copied. The screen cooled enough to respond. I selected the bank image and moved my thumb toward the trash symbol. Honestly, I nearly pressed it. Dennis's voice had followed me home from the kitchen confrontation. He could not think while people were upset. Celeste was under pressure. The family needed to get through the weekend. Birch needed stability. Deleting the image would not restore the money. I knew that. Still, some part of me believed that evidence created the crisis. Without the image, maybe there would be no argument. Without the comparison, maybe I would not have to watch Dennis choose the steamer again. My thumb hovered. The old scar pulled when I rotated my wrist. That stopped me. I moved the image into 2 separate storage accounts and emailed a copy to myself with the original receipt time in the subject line. Then I opened the secure message center for the bank and typed with both hands because my right thumb would not stop trembling. I did not accuse Celeste by name. I wrote that I disputed the authorization, had not signed it, and had been at work when it was submitted. I requested the highest resolution copy available and the transaction submission time. The automated reply appeared at 1:58. Your claim has been opened. The disputed withdrawal remains under review. Please provide documents showing that the authorization was not completed by you. Boring wording. Gray box. No warning sound. No dramatic alert. Just one quiet sentence asking me to prove that my own hand had not moved across a page. The following morning, the basement alteration department smelled of hot lint and garment steam. My eyes felt coated in sand. The muscles between my shoulder blades had tightened overnight, and the tag inside my shirt rubbed the same sore patch of skin every time I leaned toward the machine. Ticket 1847 was a satin mother-of-the-bride jacket with sleeves 2 inches too long. I pinned the first cuff at 8:16. At 8:24, I asked my supervisor, Sonia Patel, whether customers could authorize copies of old pickup receipts. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. What dates? I had already written them on the clean back of an alteration tag. 6 transactions spread across 11 months. Different customers, different pins, different days. Every receipt signed a service counter beneath the camera mounted above register 3. Sonia asked why I needed them. The words caught in my throat. I could have lied. Instead, I told her that a bank was reviewing a signature attributed to me and that I needed examples completed under workplace observation. She did not ask whether a relative was involved. She did not tell me to keep the peace. She did not explain my feelings back to me. She pulled out the customer record request sheet. Each customer had to give written permission. The records office had to remove payment information. Sonia had to approve the release and note the reason. Ordinary procedure. Slow enough to be frustrating. Clean enough to matter. I called the first customer during my 9-minute break. Mrs. Hanley remembered me because I had reconstructed the beaded shoulder of her blue evening jacket. She said yes before I finished explaining. The second customer did not answer. The third wanted the request emailed. The fourth asked whether her card number would appear. The fifth thought I was trying to sell her another alteration. The sixth had changed phone numbers. I returned to the satin cuff after every call. Needle down, presser foot lifted, fabric rotated. Needle down again. The movement gave my hands somewhere to put the panic. By noon, 3 permissions had arrived. At 1:32, the second customer called back. At 2:07, Sonia located the 6th customer through an archive service email. At 3:19, all 6 had signed. Nothing happened quickly. That mattered. Every delay forced me to sit with the possibility that Celeste was right about how the family would describe me. Difficult, fixated, financially hostile. A woman dragging strangers into a private disagreement because she could not tolerate her sister receiving attention. Cold sweat gathered beneath my bra band while I stitched the second cuff. For one ugly minute, I considered withdrawing the request. The customer receipts had nothing to do with Celeste, I told myself. Why involve them? Why involve Sonia? Why create a workplace record that could follow me? The needle stopped with a sharp clack. My right hand had lifted from the fabric without permission. And here's the thing. That fear did not come from uncertainty about the signature. It came from years of learning that any fact inconvenient to Celeste became evidence of my cruelty. I pressed my palm flat against the machine bed. Warm metal. Fine vibration from the motor. The satin had a grain direction. Pull against it, and the surface distorted, even if the stitches remained straight. The authorization was the same kind of problem. Its visible line looked correct because someone had copied the surface. The pressure underneath went the wrong way. I finished the cuff. At 5:48, Sonia brought 6 redacted receipts to my station. Each bore the customer's written release number and her approval initials. I did not stack them into a dramatic packet. I laid them one at a time beside the steel square after closing. Receipt 1. Pressure break. Receipt 2. Same location. Receipt 3. A darker pen, but the same hesitation. 4. 5. 6. Different dates. Different counters. Different levels of fatigue. The hand remained consistent. The bank authorization did not. Sonia stood at the edge of the table while I showed her. She bent close enough that the chain of her glasses touched the receipt. "I see it," she said. 3 words. My knees weakened. Not because she had solved anything. She had no power over the bank or Celeste. She had simply looked at the same physical fact and seen what I saw. At 6:11, Sonia exported my time record for April 17. It showed my employee login at 7:54 in the morning, uninterrupted ticket activity through lunch, and register assistance at 11:28. The authorization had been submitted at the local branch at 11:26. 2 minutes before I appeared on the warehouse register camera helping a customer collect a shortened veil. The bank's secure portal accepted the receipts, the manager approval, the time record, and the image comparison. A confirmation number appeared. I wrote it on an alteration tag. Then another secure message arrived. Documents received. The authorization will remain disputed while identity verification is completed. Remain disputed. Not resolved. Not reversed. But no longer treated as a normal withdrawal merely because Celeste had drawn my name convincingly. The first claim had started to separate from her story. At 10:36 the following morning, one of the new account providers returned my call. The company name was Brightwell Celebration Credit. Its portal showed one $18,600 financing package split across the same 3 consumer balances already appearing under my profile. Another person was listed as the primary guarantor, Dennis Vance. I read his name twice. The call representative said the agreement had been confirmed through a recorded phone verification. Because I was disputing an attached account, I could request the portion relevant to the identity review. Dennis would need to make his own request for the full agreement. I asked when the call occurred. March 29 at 3:42 in the afternoon. Dennis had been at physical therapy that day. I knew because I had driven him there and waited outside in the car with a cup of vending machine coffee. My next ticket was a black satin tuxedo cuff. The phone remained wedged between the machine and the thread stand while I waited on hold. The music repeated every 48 seconds. A soft piano line, 3 electronic notes, then the piano again. By the sixth repetition, my neck had locked so tightly that turning my head sent pain behind my left eye. The representative returned and explained the process. Written dispute, identification copy, relationship statement, consent from Dennis if he wanted the entire audio. I asked whether they could preserve the recording immediately. She gave me a reference number. I wrote it beneath the bank confirmation on the same alteration tag. Black ink over faded size markings. The first audio excerpt became available through the lender portal 2 business days later. I listened during my break in the service corridor behind the warehouse. One earbud worked. The other produced only a faint crackle. Tomas Bell sat inside his shoe repair shop on the opposite side of the corridor, trimming a replacement sole with a curved knife. He did not ask why I kept replaying the same 30 seconds. The recording began with static, then a customer service voice asking the caller to confirm his identity. Celeste answered in a lowered register. Not a convincing impression if you knew Dennis. Convincing enough for someone who did not? Yes, this is Dennis Mance. I understand I am the primary guarantor for the full event financing agreement. She stretched the words the way Dennis did when he was nervous. But she missed the pauses. My father stopped before dates. Always. He would say the month, clear his throat, then give the day. Celeste recited his date of birth in one smooth line. The representative asked whether the agreement had been explained to him. A refrigerator compressor started somewhere behind Celeste's voice. Then came a faint clink. Glass against a counter, Celeste answered, still using the lower pitch. Yes, I approved the total amount and authorized the scheduled payments from my retirement income. At the end of retirement, her voice rose. Just slightly. Her real voice. The customer service representative asked her to repeat the last sentence because the connection had broken. Celeste inhaled sharply. When she answered again, the imitation was slower, more careful. I played that section 4 times. Tomas's knife stopped moving across the sole. He looked up, but said nothing. My stomach cramped from the coffee I had consumed without food. The earbud wire had twisted beneath my collar, scraping my neck every time I touched the screen. I kept listening. The call contained no confession, no mention of Mara, no statement that she was pretending. Only a woman using my father's identifying information and shaping her voice around his. At the end, the representative thanked Mr. Vance, Celeste answered in her normal pitch. You're welcome. 2 words. Clear. Unmistakable. The audio ended. For a few seconds, I watched the playback bar sit at 0. Dennis had defended the anniversary because Celeste presented it as a gift to him. She had attached his retirement income to the bill. My first instinct was not satisfaction. It was terror. If I showed him, his breathing would change. His shoulders would fold. He would say he could not think. Celeste would tell him the recording had been misunderstood. Rhea would call it an administrative shortcut. And I would become the person who ruined his retirement by telling him it had already been placed at risk. I opened the delete menu. My thumb rested above the option. Thomas set the knife down. He did not ask to hear the recording. He looked at the way my hand shook around the phone and pushed a chair toward me with the toe of his boot. The chair legs scraped the concrete. I sat. Cold air moved through the service corridor. The shop smelled of leather dust, rubber cement, and the unsweetened coffee Tomas kept in a dented thermos. I keep thinking I should erase it, I said. He threaded a heavy needle through a boot sole. Would erasing it make the call unhappen? No. Would it remove his name? No. He pulled the thread until it lay tight inside the groove. That was all. No speech. No instruction. I canceled the delete command. The file went into 2 storage locations. I saved the portal notice, the reference number, and the time of access. Then, I requested the full call with Dennis's written consent. Getting that consent meant approaching him without Celeste present. At 6:18 the next morning, Dennis stood in the driveway scraping frost from the windshield of his truck with an expired store card. I held the lender's summary where he could see his own name. His scraping slowed. I told him there was a recorded call confirming him as primary guarantor. He said Celeste handled the paperwork. I asked whether he had spoken to Brightwell Celebration Credit on March 29. His hand stopped. The edge of the plastic card remained pressed against the glass. No. The word fogged the air between us. I showed him the consent form needed to obtain the complete recording. His eyes moved toward the kitchen window. Celeste's bedroom light was off. "Will this cancel the party?" he asked. "I don't know. Your sister has put a lot into this. She put your retirement income into it." His mouth opened. Closed. A small muscle moved beneath his left eye. Then he asked whether the truck's heater had always made that clicking sound. That was how his body tried to leave. I held the pen out. "Did you make the call?" "No." "Then sign the request." He took the pen. His signature was slow, uneven, and completely his. The full audio arrived that afternoon. I did not confront Celeste. I did not play it for Rhea. I did not tell the vendors. I kept working. By then, the panic had changed shape. My hands still trembled sometimes. I still woke before dawn with my jaw locked. I still checked Birch's registration page twice a day to make sure Celeste had not changed the contact details. But the evidence no longer felt like something I had to survive all at once. Each item had one purpose. The 6 receipts showed how my hand actually moved. The workplace record showed where my body had been. The lender call showed what Celeste had done with Dennis's voice. Separate formats, separate witnesses, separate systems. No single argument from Celeste could erase all of them. At 7:02 that evening, I finished shortening a navy satin sleeve and cut the final thread. The machine motor wound down beneath my palms. No triumph. No sudden courage. Just a clear sequence. Preserve the original. Confirm the time. Use authorized records. Let each system answer only the question it was built to answer. For the first time since the bank image appeared, I did not need Celeste to admit anything. The third piece of evidence arrived because Rhea believed I was still too frightened to use the first 2. At 8:12 on Friday evening, my phone buzzed while I was replacing a torn waiststay in Celeste's anniversary gown. She had brought the dress to the warehouse through the employee entrance because she did not want customers seeing the alterations department handling it. The gown occupied 2 padded hangers. Rhea stood beside the fitting platform, answering vendor messages. Celeste watched herself in the mirror while I worked inside the bodice with my cheek nearly against the lining. My phone remained face down beneath the cutting table. One vibration, then another. A voicemail notification appeared when I finally checked it during my break. Rhea had called. The message lasted 1 minute and 48 seconds. At first, I assumed she had left another lecture about family gratitude. She had sent 3 that week already, each one spoken slowly enough to sound reasonable in isolation. This one began with the muffled scrape of a handbag zipper. Then Rhea's voice. "Mara, stop contacting the lender. I saw the guarantor page." A pause. Traffic moved somewhere behind her. Celeste said Dennis's name was only a reference. I kept quiet because she promised my vendor deposits would be returned first, and I still expect the floral commission. Another pause. Shorter. "If you collapse this before the release, I lose my money. Do not drag me into your crusade. I have the messages showing Celeste organized the financing, and I will use them if she tries to blame me." The recording ended with the dull tap of a car door. I stood in the service corridor, holding the phone so tightly that the cracked glass pressed into my thumb. Rhea had called me deliberately. She believed one more controlled warning would frighten me into backing down. Instead, she had confirmed that she saw the guarantor page, understood that Dennis's name was involved, and negotiated to protect her own money before warning him. I saved the original message. Then I exported the audio file without editing it and took screenshots showing the caller number, date, time, and duration. The phone created a transcript, but I kept the recording because the automatic text had changed dentist to dentist and floral commission to floor condition. My hands trembled while I uploaded copies to 2 locations. The sound of Ria's voice made the lender call worse. She had known. For 2 weeks, she had stood beside Dennis, arranged his chair at vendor meetings, and told everyone the anniversary was helping him feel valued after retirement. Meanwhile, she had already learned that his retirement income carried the entire agreement. She had not warned him. She had negotiated. Her deposits first. Her commission protected. Then, silence. If I had needed one clean explanation for the entire family, that voicemail provided it. They did not confuse love with sacrifice. They knew the difference. They simply expected me and Dennis to supply the sacrifice while they collected whatever could be protected in advance. The corridor door opened behind me. Celeste stepped out wearing the gown with the back still unfastened. "What are you doing?" I locked the screen. "Taking my break." "You left pins in the waist." "There are 2 minutes left on my break." Her expression barely changed. One eyebrow lifted. That was all. "Works are under a lot of pressure." "So am I." I'm trying not to personalize that response. I put the phone into my pocket. Celeste looked toward Tomas's shop. He sat beneath his work lamp, pressing a new heel onto a brown leather shoe. His hands did not stop. She lowered her voice. "Ria says you've been contacting financial institutions." "I contacted accounts under my name. You understand how hostile that looks before a family milestone?" "I understand what the balances show." Her mouth tightened for half a second. Then the softness returned. "I hope you are not creating a permanent trauma around something that can still be repaired." The remaining brake alarm sounded on my phone. A flat electronic chirp. I walked past her and returned to the gown. That was when I understood the value of appearing tired. Celeste wanted me exhausted because exhausted people agreed to things. But she also mistook exhaustion for surrender. So I gave her the version she expected. My shoulders stayed rounded. My answers became shorter. When Ria made comments about my receipt obsession, I did not defend myself. When Dennis asked whether the bank situation was calming down, I said it was being reviewed. When Celeste handed me the schedule for the notary appointment, I did not ask why the anniversary venue's final release depended on my signature. I nodded. Then I copied the appointment time into my own calendar. The following morning, I dealt with Birch. Celeste's threat had worked because she controlled the registration account, not because she cared for him. The veterinary invoices were in my name. 8 years of food deliveries had come from my card. I had paid for his vaccinations, his dental cleaning, the medication for a skin allergy, and the emergency examination after he swallowed part of a dish towel as a puppy. Celeste had updated the microchip account once when Dennis changed telephone providers. She left herself as the primary contact. I called the registry at 9:03. The representative asked for Birch's chip number. I read it from the veterinary record. She asked whether I was reporting the animal stolen. No. Whether Birch was in danger? No, he is healthy and with me. Whether there was an ownership dispute? Yes. The procedure was almost disappointingly ordinary. I submitted the adoption payment record, veterinary invoices, photographs spanning 8 years, and the household address history. The registry placed a temporary dispute notice on the profile. No contact could transfer ownership until the documents were reviewed. A gray banner appeared on the account. Ownership update restricted, pending documentation. That was it. No siren. No dramatic notification to Celeste. Just an administrative restriction she would not see until she tried to change something. The veterinary clinic added me as the primary care contact because their own payment history already showed that I had authorized every treatment for 7 years. Birch slept beneath my chair while I completed the forms. His rear paw twitched against the floor. I watched him breathe until the tension in my jaw eased. The next problem was where he would stay during the appointment. Leaving him at the house meant giving Celeste one last chance to move him. Taking him into a notary office would turn the meeting into exactly the emotional scene she wanted. Thomas did not hesitate when I asked. He can stay in the back room. Only during the appointment. Thomas continued trimming a rubber sole. He'll have water. I'll bring his bed. He'll ignore it and sleep on the concrete. That was probably true. I returned the following evening with Birch's folded blanket, food, leash, and a written list of the veterinary number and feeding time. Tomas read the list. Then he placed it beside his coffee without making fun of me for writing down things he already knew. His shop was narrow enough that both walls seemed to lean toward the workbench. Leather scraps filled open bins. A small fan pushed the smell of rubber cement into the corridor. Beneath the lamp, a delivery driver's boot sat clamped upside down while Tomas worked heavy thread through the sole. I took the chair beside the wall. Birch settled across my shoes. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence did not demand anything from me. That was rare. I said, "Dennis will think I did this to him." Thomas turned the boot in his hands and checked the seam he had just closed. "People who keep a private ledger always call it family when the numbers favor them," he said. "They hide the real price, let you lift the whole load, then hand you a bill for making them uncomfortable. That is not loyalty." He pulled the thread once more and tested it with his thumb. "Loyalty shows you the full weight before you agree. Then it takes its own end without keeping score." I looked down at Birch across my shoes. Thomas set the boot beside its mate. "You are not charging them for what you gave," he said. "You are only refusing the next invoice." Truth be told, that made it harder, not easier. Because once somebody describes the difference plainly, you lose the excuse of pretending you have merely misunderstood. Celeste did not share burdens. She renamed them. Dennis did not carry them. He stepped aside whenever they became uncomfortable. Rhea checked whether her own end had been padded before allowing anyone else to lift. I scratched the spot behind Birch's ear. His weight rested across both of my shoes. The first message from my employer arrived at 6:27 the next morning. Sonia asked me to come to the office before clocking in. A printed email lay on her desk. Celeste had written to the warehouse's regional customer relations address. She described herself as a concerned family member and wellness professional. She claimed I might be using confidential customer signature patterns to create misleading comparisons in a personal financial dispute. She called it a reputational concern. The message contained the disputed bank authorization as an attachment. For several seconds, I could only look at my own forged name printed beneath the company logo. My stomach made a loud, empty sound in the quiet office. Sonia glanced toward the door, giving me the dignity of pretending she had not heard it. "You followed the records process," she said. "I did. I know." She placed the 6 customer consent forms beside Celeste's email. Each one had a release number. Each receipt had been redacted. Each request carried Sonia's approval. The regional office still had to review the complaint. That was procedure. They interviewed me after lunch. They checked the customer permissions. They reviewed the time record. They confirmed that no payment information had been released. At 4:15, the internal reviewer emailed the result. The employee obtained all comparison records through approved customer request procedures. No privacy or records handling violation was identified. Celeste's complaint had done 2 things. It created a formal workplace record confirming that I followed policy, and it supplied another copy of the disputed authorization directly from her email account. She had tried to accuse me of fabricating a comparison while attaching the item being compared. The whole thing was pinned together with bills they expected me to wear. I did not laugh. I wanted to. Instead, I printed the review result and stored it with the other records. That evening, Celeste sent a message to the family celebration group. "Keep Dad calm until Mara signs the release. Once the notary accepts our version, she can object all she wants because the venue money will already be protected. The message remained visible for perhaps 4 seconds. Then it disappeared. Celeste had intended to send it to Rhea. She had posted it to 14 people. My phone displayed the full text in the notification preview. I captured the screen before opening the group. One of the caterers had already replied. Was this meant for the vendor team? Rhea posted a question mark. Celeste removed the message and wrote that autocorrect had distorted a private scheduling note. No one challenged her, not publicly, but the caterer's response remained. So did my screenshot. The deleted message did not prove the signature was false. It did not prove Dennis's voice had been copied. It did not replace Rhea's voicemail. It showed Celeste believed the notary's acceptance would protect the venue money even if I objected afterward. Intent, timing, coordination, another separate purpose. By then, the appointment was 3 days away. Celeste continued making me work on the gown. At the final vendor fitting, she stood on a raised platform while florists, caterers, and a videographer moved around her. A crystal clasp near the wrist had loosened again. She held out her arm. Mara. I brought the needle kit. Celeste sat in a chair and made me kneel beside her in front of everyone. The floor beneath my right knee had a raised metal strip where 2 sections of temporary flooring met. It pressed directly against the bone. Rhea told the notary, who had arrived to review identification requirements, that I was the family helper who loved little projects. Celeste corrected her. My gifted little sister. She struggles with money, but creating makes her feel useful. I pushed the needle through 3 layers of satin and the reinforced crystal loop. The thread caught. I pulled it back. Started again. Celeste discussed the release document above my head. The notary said every disputed signature would have to be accounted for before she could proceed. Celeste's wrist shifted while I worked, forcing the needle against my thumbnail. A small point of blood appeared beneath the nail. She did not notice. Would you have stayed there? Honestly, with your knee pressing into a metal floor strip, your own blood collecting beneath your thumbnail, and the person who used your identity introducing your professional labor as a little hobby? Could you have finished that exact stitch without exposing everything too early? I needed the official in the room. I needed Celeste committed to her version. I needed her to believe I had come to sign. So I finished the clasp, 1 stitch, then another. I secured the thread and bit it clean. Celeste admired the sleeve in the mirror. See, she said to the notary, helping regulates her. I stood. The pain in my knees spread slowly down my shin. I'll be at the appointment, I said. Celeste smiled, not with cruelty, with relief. She believed the pressure had worked. The night before the meeting, I laid each item across my work table. 6 original pickup receipts, released with customer permission. The high-resolution bank authorization. The workplace time record. The bank dispute confirmation. Dennis's written consent request. The lender's full audio recording. Rhea's voicemail in its original file format. The screenshot of Celeste's deleted group message. The employer's completed internal review. Birch's ownership dispute notice. I checked each date, each time, each file name. No single item attempted to prove everything. That was the strength of it. The bank record showed the copied mark. My workplace records showed where I was. The lender's audio carried Celeste's voice inside Dennis's agreement. Rhea's message showed hidden knowledge and a private bargain. The group message showed the purpose of the notary appointment. The registry notice removed Birch from the leverage. At 11:38, Celeste knocked on my bedroom door. She did not enter. Her voice came through the wood. I want tomorrow to be healing. I kept aligning the receipts against Evelyn's square. Celeste waited. We can still choose family, she said. I looked at the repeated break in every genuine signature. Same location. Same hand. I'll be there, I answered. Her footsteps moved away. At 6:02 the next morning, I took Birch through the side door before anyone woke. Tomas opened his shop early. Birch followed him into the back room without resistance. I placed the leash on the workbench beside the written instructions. Then I lifted the alteration tote. The steel square rested at the bottom beneath the 9 core pieces and their supporting records. Cold weight against my hip. At 8:46, I entered the escrow and notary office. The door was open. Celeste was already seated. Dennis stared at a paper cup. Ria arranged the vendor schedule. On the table, the notary's stamp waited beside a glass pitcher of water. Celeste looked at the tote in my hand, then at my face. "You came," she said. Yes. She believed that meant I had surrendered. At 8:46 that morning, the notary's office felt smaller than it had during the preliminary visit. The door remained open to the corridor, but the room itself was narrow enough that every chair seemed to block another person's exit. 4 ceiling panels hummed above us. One flickered at irregular intervals, turning Celeste's gown from warm ivory to gray and back again. A glass pitcher stood near the center of the table. Condensation had formed beneath it, leaving a round, damp mark on the laminate. Dennis stared at that mark as if somebody had assigned it to him. Ria sat beside him with the vendor schedule balanced on one knee. Her phone kept vibrating inside her handbag. Each time it happened, she pressed the bag shut with her palm without checking the screen. Celeste occupied the chair directly across from the notary. A transparent garment cover protected most of her custom gown, but the sleeves remained exposed. The crystal clasp I had repaired the night before caught the overhead light whenever she moved her wrist. She looked composed, not happy, not nervous, professionally disappointed. That was the expression she used when she wanted another person's resistance to appear like a personal failure she was patiently enduring. The notary introduced herself again and asked us to place our identification on the table. Celeste slid hers forward first. Dennis followed. Ria said she was attending only as a witness and vendor coordinator. I placed my identification beside the alteration tote. The steel square rested at the bottom. Its weight pulled the strap into my shoulder. My neck had cramped during the drive, and one corner of my shirt label kept scraping the skin beneath my hair. Nothing about me felt calm. My stomach had been empty since the previous afternoon. It tightened hard enough that I worried the sound might carry across the table. My wrist ached. The knee that had pressed against the vendor room floor strip throbbed each time I shifted. Celeste glanced toward the tote. "You brought work?" "Records." Her eyes returned to my face. The notary opened the settlement document. She explained that the appointment could proceed only if the disputed signatures were confirmed or the parties agreed to another verified resolution. Celeste nodded slowly. "We understand." The notary looked at me. "Do you understand the purpose of today's meeting?" "Yes." "And are you prepared to review the authorization attributed to you?" "Yes." Ria exhaled through her nose. "Finally!" The notary's eyes moved toward her. Ria adjusted the vendor schedule. "Sorry, this has just been very hard on the family." Celeste reached across and touched Dennis's sleeve. He flinched at the contact, then forced his arm to remain still. She told the notary that the anniversary had been planned as a restorative experience for him after retirement. She said the financial disagreements had placed him under unnecessary strain and that she hoped the settlement would prevent further damage. Dennis kept looking at the water ring. The notary asked whether he needed a break. "No." His voice barely reached the table. Celeste answered for him anyway. "He does better when we keep things simple." I felt the old response moving through me. "Explain more. Speak faster. Make Dennis look up. Convince somebody in the room that the obvious thing was obvious." My fingers tightened around the tote strap. Then I let go. Each item had one purpose. That was all. The notary turned to the signature page. Before she could continue, Celeste lifted her wrist. The crystal clasp had loosened again. One strand of thread had pulled free from the loop and hung against the satin. She looked at me. "Mara, could you fix this first? It will catch." The notary paused. Ria gave a small laugh. "She has a kit. She always has a kit." I did. Celeste knew that. The needle case was inside the tote beside the evidence. For half a second, I considered refusing. Then I understood what she was doing. She wanted the room arranged the way it always was. Celeste seated. Dennis protected from discomfort. Ria managing the story. Me kneeling to repair whatever threatened the surface. I opened the needle case. The gold snap popped loose before I touched it. $6.49. Celeste turned her chair slightly, giving me access to the sleeve. I knelt. The carpet was thin enough that the floor beneath it pressed directly into my knee. My fingers shook while I threaded the needle. The first attempt missed the eye. Ria checked the time. "Works to leave for the conservatory by 10. Celeste spoke to the notary above my head. "Mara is extremely talented. She struggles with money, but creating helps her feel useful." The thread entered the needle on the second attempt. My face became hot. The clasp needed only 2 anchoring stitches. Celeste kept moving her wrist while she talked, forcing me to pause each time. She described my dispute as a pattern of withdrawing consent after emotional overwhelm. She said I had initially offered to support the celebration. She said family resources had always been shared. The notary wrote something on her pad. I pushed the needle through the satin. 1 stitch. Then another. The thread tightened around the crystal loop. Celeste could put a soft voice over anything and call the damage intentional design. The loose end lay across my thumb. I cut it with the small scissors instead of biting it this time. Then I stood. The room tilted for one brief second when the blood returned to my leg. I placed one hand against the chair until the dizziness passed. Celeste smoothed the repaired cuff. "Thank you." The notary looked from her to me. "We can continue now?" "Yes," I said. Celeste smiled gently. "I think this is a good example of how we can still care for one another despite conflict." I sat down. The crystal I had just secured caught the light. She looked at that tiny repaired detail with complete confidence. The gown was intact. I was in my assigned chair. The notary document waited in front of her. And I wondered whether she understood that the smallest physical interruption in my handwriting was about to outweigh every polished sentence she had brought into that room. The notary placed the disputed authorization between us. Celeste folded her hands. I asked her one question. "Before we review anything else, will you confirm that every account application, every withdrawal authorization, and every guarantee connected to the anniversary was signed voluntarily in Dad's physical presence?" Dennis's eyes lifted from the table. Ria stopped pressing her handbag closed. Celeste did not answer immediately. Only a second passed, maybe 2, but I saw the decision. She glanced at the notary's pad, then at Dennis, then back at me. "Yes." Her voice remained soft. Everyone understood what they were signing. Mara has struggled to hold on to that reality because the attention around the celebration became difficult for her. The notary looked at me. "Do you dispute that statement?" "Yes." Celeste inhaled through her nose. The sound was almost silent. I opened the alteration tote and removed one genuine pickup receipt. No thick folder. No dramatic stack. One receipt. I placed it beneath the examination lamp. Then I placed the bank authorization beside it. The signatures appeared almost identical. Same forward-leaning M. Same compressed middle letters. Same long curve beneath the surname. The notary adjusted the lamp. "What should I be comparing?" I held my right wrist beneath the light and turned it until the pale crescent scar became visible. This injury tightens when I rotate through the last curve of my surname. Every signature I've made since I was 20 has a pressure interruption in the same place. Celeste shifted in her chair. I pointed to the genuine receipt. The notary leaned closer. There it was. A tiny thinning of the ink near the final curve. The line resumed less than a millimeter later. Then I pointed to the bank authorization. Smooth from beginning to end. The notary examined both marks without speaking. Celeste gave a quiet sigh. I'm concerned that we are turning a common handwriting variation into another emotional interpretation. I removed the other 5 receipts, one by one. Each carried a customer release number and Sonia's approval initials. Different dates. Different pins. Different days of work. The same small interruption appeared in every signature. The notary arranged them in a line. Dennis leaned forward for the first time. His gaze moved from the receipts to my wrist. What is that? The place my hand stops. Celeste looked at him. Dad, handwriting changes under stress. I removed the warehouse time record. At 11:26 on April 17, this authorization was submitted at the bank. At 11:28, I was recorded assisting a customer at Register 3 inside the bridal warehouse. The notary read the timestamp. Rhea shifted her handbag to the other side of her chair. Celeste's expression changed by less than an inch. Her lips parted, then closed. The notary examined the bank image again. Were these workplace receipts released through your employer? Yes. I placed the approval form beside them. Each customer gave written permission. My manager authorized every copy. The notary read the release numbers. Celeste reached toward the water pitcher, then stopped before touching it. This is becoming needlessly adversarial. The notary removed her stamp from the table. She opened the drawer to her right and placed it inside. The small wooden handle struck the bottom with a dull tap. I cannot notarize this document while the identity of the signer remains disputed. I will record that today's appointment ended without notarization. Celeste's fingers closed around each other. Can we pause? Mara has been preparing this as a performance. I am not making a finding beyond today's transaction, the notary said. I am declining to proceed. The first part was over. No applause. No accusation. A stamp placed in a drawer. That was enough to stop the paper Celeste needed. Rhea's phone vibrated again. This time she checked it. Her face tightened as she read whatever had appeared. Celeste turned toward her. Do not contact the vendors yet. Rhea looked up. The venue release was supposed to be signed this morning. We are handling it. The word "we" sounded different now. Smaller. I removed the Brightwell celebration credit summary. Dennis's name appeared at the top as primary guarantor. I turned the page toward him. His eyes stopped moving. What is this? Celeste answered before I could. A temporary financing structure. You knew about it. Dennis touched the page with one finger. 18,600? The total exposure is not the same as the final cost. Did I sign this? You agreed to support the celebration. That isn't what I asked. His voice rose slightly. The change was enough. His shoulders drew upward. His breathing shortened. He began rubbing one thumb across the seam of his trousers. Celeste leaned toward him. Dad, stay with me. Mara is trying to overload the room with documents. I placed my phone on the table. No, I'm going to play the confirmation call. Dennis looked at the screen. His lips moved once, without sound. Celeste's hands separated. Mara, that recording is private. Dad authorized the release. I tapped play. Static filled the room. Then the lender representative asked the caller to confirm his identity. Celeste's imitation came through the speaker. Lower pitch. Slower words. Almost, Dennis. His right knee began bouncing beneath the table. The voice confirmed his date of birth without the pause he always made. It confirmed him as primary guarantor. It authorized scheduled payments from his retirement income. Dennis looked at Celeste. She did not look back. The recording reached the section where the representative asked the caller to repeat the final sentence. The imitation returned. Then the lender thanked Mr. Vance. Celeste's normal voice answered, You're welcome. The audio stopped. Dennis's knee stopped moving. His entire body became still, not calm, empty. His attention fixed on the water ring beneath the pitcher. A drop of condensation broke away from the glass and widened the circle by a fraction. He watched it happen. Celeste reached for his sleeve. He pulled his arm away. The movement was small. It was the first time I had ever seen him refuse her touch. "Dad," she said, "I can explain the administrative shortcut." His breathing came in shallow pulls. "That was you. The lender process was designed badly. That was your voice. I was protecting the event from unnecessary delay. My retirement. No money has been taken from your checks. You put my name on it." Celeste's voice softened even further. "I was carrying the family through a complicated process because everyone else was overwhelmed." Dennis stared at the wet circle. The notary wrote another line on her pad. Rhea stood halfway, then sat again. "This has nothing to do with me." I looked at her. She froze. Celeste turned sharply. "Rhea, not now." That was the opening. I selected the voicemail. Rhea recognized the first scrape of her own handbag zipper before her voice began. Her mouth opened. The recording continued. She had seen the guarantor page. Celeste had promised her deposits would be returned first. She still expected the floral commission. She would remain quiet. She would expose the messages if Celeste blamed her. Every sentence entered the room in Rhea's own voice. Dennis stopped staring at the water ring. He looked at his sister. "You knew?" Rhea lifted both hands. "I did not know the full situation." The recording had just said she saw the guarantor page. Dennis pushed the credit summary toward her. "You knew my checks were on this. I thought Celeste would correct it. You asked for your money first. I had vendor deposits at risk. So did Mara. That is different." The sentence came out automatically. Rhea heard herself. Her lips pressed together. Celeste leaned back in her chair. "You are both reacting to partial information." Rhea turned on her. "You told me Dennis was only a reference. You handled the vendor financing. I handled vendors. You handled the lender. You introduced them because you said Mara had agreed to pay." Celeste's calm voice began to crack at the edges. "Not louder. Faster." Rhea unlocked her phone and opened a message thread. "You said you would reimburse me before the venue release. You are misrepresenting a planning discussion. I have every message." Dennis pressed both palms against his knees as though he needed to keep them in place. His breathing made a faint whistle. The notary asked whether he wanted medical assistance. He shook his head. Rhea began forwarding messages. One vendor, then another. Her handbag slid from her lap because her hands were trembling. It struck the carpet without drama and spilled a packet of tissues, 2 pens, and a roll of breath mints. She stared at the breath mints. For several seconds, she did not pick anything up. Celeste looked from Dennis to Rhea to the notary. The center of her performance was gone. Dennis no longer accepted her protection. Rhea no longer protected her story. The official would not stamp the release. Celeste folded her arms across her stomach. Her breathing accelerated. "This room is no longer safe." Nobody answered. She looked directly at the notary. "Mara designed this to punish me for celebrating love. She has a long history of withholding support and then manufacturing evidence to justify the withdrawal." The notary's pen stopped. Celeste continued. "I am asking that we pause until she can return to regulation and approach the family without hostility." I felt the exhaustion then, not victory. The weight of every hymn, every late payment, every hour spent deciding whether Dennis's fear mattered more than my future. Celeste was still smoothing the repaired cuff. Again. Her thumb passed over the crystal clasp I had fixed while kneeling beside her chair. I looked at that stitch and understood that she believed even this moment should remain about how well she was being treated. I asked her one question. Does forged consent become valid when the person who supplied it feels distressed? Celeste began answering. What you call forged consent is actually She saw the notary writing. The sentence stopped. Air moved through the copier vent. The fan above it made a faint clicking sound every fourth rotation. No one spoke. I closed the audio file, returned the phone to my tote, and stood. Birch was still waiting in the back room of Tomas's shop, exactly where I had left him. Celeste could not move him. She could not use him to keep me in the room. Behind me, Rhea continued forwarding messages. Dennis remained in his chair. Celeste called my name. Once. I turned. Her face had lost its prepared expression. She looked physically smaller, arms folded tight, breaths trapped high in her chest. The notary has already declined the release, Celeste, so you can keep explaining my feelings while I collect Birch from Tomas and sleep before my morning shift. I left through the open door. At 1:22 that afternoon, Celeste filed a second workplace complaint, repeating the same accusation and asking the regional office to preserve every record connected to my request. The reviewer reopened the file, checked the 6 customer releases and Sonia's approvals, and cleared me again at 4:38. Her second complaint added nothing against me. It created one more dated record showing that I had followed procedure. The bank's first correction appeared on a Tuesday morning at 6:18. No celebration. No phone call from an executive. Just a line in the account history. Disputed withdrawal reversed, $26,800. I was standing in the kitchen of Tomas's apartment above the shoe shop, holding Birch's water bowl beneath the faucet. The pipes knocked twice inside the wall before the water ran clear. My phone lay beside a chipped ceramic mug, screen turned upward. For several seconds, I did not touch it. The balance showed $26,843.12, the original savings. The $43 that had remained after Celeste emptied the account. Everything my name was supposed to protect. My hand tightened around the bowl. Water spilled over my fingers and ran beneath the metal rim onto the counter. Birch nudged the back of my leg because breakfast was late. That was what brought me back. I dried the counter with a dish towel, filled his bowl, and opened the bank message. The identity review team had accepted the workplace timestamps, the 6 signed receipts, the authorization image, and the written notice that the notary had declined to proceed. The 3 consumer accounts were being closed as unauthorized. The associated reporting entries would be removed after the creditors completed their documentation. The wording remained careful, pending final processing, subject to verification. Updates may require multiple reporting cycles. Honestly, that helped. The correction did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived as numbered steps, reference codes, and dates. Things that could be checked. I wrote each deadline on the back of an old alteration ticket. Then I went downstairs and opened Tomas's shop. He had left early for a supplier appointment and trusted me to accept 2 deliveries. A carton of rubber heel blocks arrived at 7:03. A courier dropped off 3 pairs of work boots at 7:19. At 7:30, I clocked in at the bridal warehouse. The machines were already running. Life did not pause because some of my money had returned. I shortened 2 linings, replaced a zipper hook, and rebuilt the inner strap of a strapless gown before lunch. At 12:06, Brightwell Celebration Credit called Dennis. He did not answer. They called again at 12:41. This time, he picked up. I know because he called me 3 minutes later and left a message, asking whether I had told them to contact him. I did not return the call. The lender's review took 9 more days. They compared Dennis's signed consent request with the original agreement. They listened to the confirmation recording. They checked the telephone number used during the call and found that it belonged to Celeste. The guarantee was voided. The full $18,600 did not disappear. Brightwell removed Dennis from the agreement and redirected the unpaid balances to the person who had submitted it and to the event deposits tied to it. The anniversary conservatory retained only the non-refundable planning fee. The refundable venue hold returned to the settlement account. The florist released the reserve for installations that had never been delivered. The videographer canceled the edited Val film package. The linen company collected unopened inventory. Each cancellation produced another ordinary email. Service discontinued. Deposit returned less administrative charge. Final balance due. The 6-hour performance came apart through accounting departments. No one needed to destroy anything. No one needed to shout. The vendors simply stopped providing work that had not been paid for honestly. Celeste's anniversary did not happen. The conservatory removed the event from its calendar at 3:22 on a Thursday afternoon. At 3:26, Rhea sent a message to the family group saying she had never approved the financing plan. At 3:29, she forwarded 6 of Celeste's voice messages to the florist. At 3:31, Celeste removed Rhea from the group. By 4 o'clock, both women had contacted Dennis separately and explained why the other one was responsible. Dennis did not answer either of them. He called me instead. I let it ring. The bank completed the remaining account corrections over the next month. The first retailer removed $7,200. The second removed $6,400. The third delayed until the bank sent the notary record directly. For 11 days, the $5,000 balance remained beneath my name. Every morning, I checked it before brushing my teeth. Every night, I checked it again. The number did not change. I knew the dispute reference by memory. I knew the date of every document. I knew which representative had promised to review the workplace timestamp. Still, the unchanged balance pulled my stomach tight each time I saw it. At 9:14 on the 12th morning, the account displayed 0. A separate notice confirmed that it would be removed from my consumer report. I sat on the edge of Tomas's guest bed, holding the phone. Birch slept against the door. The room smelled faintly of leather from the shop below. A delivery truck idled in the alley, causing the window glass to tremble inside its frame. I expected relief to feel larger. Instead, my shoulders dropped. That was all. The muscles had been lifted toward my ears for so long that lowering them felt unfamiliar. The final civil settlement recovered the remaining principal through refundable deposits and the sale of anniversary items that Celeste could no longer pay to store. The gown was included. Not because I requested it, because she had financed it through one of the disputed accounts. A resale broker listed it as an unworn custom anniversary dress with incomplete alterations. The crystal clasp remained attached to the sleeve. My stitches outlasted the celebration. I did not bid on it. By the time the settlement closed, the $26,800 withdrawal had been returned and all $18,600 in unauthorized balances had been removed from my name. Late charges connected to the unauthorized accounts were removed. The condominium on Waverly Street had already sold to someone else. That loss did not reverse. The unit, the chipped cabinets, the narrow balcony, the bathroom fan that sounded like loose screws, all of it belonged to another person. For a few days, that hurt more than the money. Recovery did not return me to the exact point where Celeste had interrupted my life. It gave me resources again. It did not give me that door. Dennis lost his position on the neighborhood retirement committee 2 weeks after the notary appointment. Rhea had forwarded so many messages to protect herself that several committee members saw Dennis pressuring me to accept the disputed debt. One message contained his own words from before he understood the guarantee. He had written that I should stop making the anniversary about money because Celeste had done so much for the family. The committee chair asked him to step aside until the dispute was resolved. Dennis resigned instead. He told people the stress had become bad for his blood pressure. Rhea demanded that Celeste repay the vendor commission she had been promised. Celeste said the commission had depended on a successful event. Rhea threatened to release more messages. Celeste accused her of exploiting a family crisis for profit. They stopped speaking after Rhea sent the florist a voice note in which Celeste described her as useful because she could make pressure sound like enthusiasm. Rhea's vendor contacts dried up. By autumn, she was working weekend sample tables at a warehouse club. disposable gloves, folding table, small paper cups. The first time one of my coworkers saw her there, she asked whether I wanted a photograph. I said no. Ria's hourly work was not a punishment. What stayed with me was that she now depended on the same kind of labor she had once used to rank mine beneath hers. Celeste disappeared from her wellness pages for almost 3 months. Her final video said she was taking time away from public work after surviving a targeted family betrayal. She did not mention the bank. She did not mention Dennis's voice. She did not mention my signature. When she returned online, the videos were gone. So were the photographs from the conservatory fittings. I learned only once that Celeste had taken an hourly job at an event financing office. A verification notice reached an old family email account Dennis still used, and he forwarded it without comment. I did not contact the office, ask vendors for updates, or follow her progress. Knowing where she worked did not change the money, the signature, or the call. I filed the message and stopped tracking her life. Her final message to me arrived on a Sunday at 10:52 in the evening. She wrote that Dennis was isolated, Ria had become unstable, and the family's public humiliation had damaged everyone's health. She said I had obtained what I wanted: control, attention, punishment. The message contained 4 paragraphs about my motives. Not one sentence acknowledged the copied signature. Not one sentence acknowledged the lender call. Not one sentence asked whether the money had returned. I saved the message with the other records. Then I closed it. Dennis came to the warehouse service entrance 3 days later. Rain had darkened the shoulders of his jacket. His hair lay flat against his forehead. He held a paper bag from the bakery near our old house. Sonia found me near the pressing stations and said my father was outside. My first physical response was embarrassment, not fear, not anger. Embarrassment that my family had entered my workplace again. I removed my apron and went into the service corridor. Dennis stood beside Thomas's shop. He held out the bakery bag. Lemon slices. I looked at it, the same kind he had offered after missing the condominium inspection. He noticed my face and lowered the bag. I didn't think about that. No. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his sleeve onto the concrete. He said he had not understood the financing. He said raised voices made his chest close and his thoughts scatter. When Celeste continued speaking, he let her decide because agreeing ended the pressure faster. He described it as though his body had chosen for him. Some of that was true. His hands trembled while he spoke. He kept rubbing his thumb against the wet paper bag until the grease mark spread across the bottom. I could see the broken part of him. The frightened young man he must once have been. The retired installer who could identify moisture beneath the floor but could not remain present when his daughters disagreed. Understanding it did not change what he had done. He switched from the apology to a complaint about his shoulder. Then he mentioned the rain. He asked whether I had been eating enough because I looked thin. The conversation kept trying to become ordinary. I stopped it. You saw the bank image. His mouth closed. I asked you to look at it. You turned on the steamer. Mara? You knew Celeste controlled Birch's registration. You heard her threaten to move him. You still asked me to sign the release. I was scared. I know. The corridor went quiet except for the clicking fan inside Tomas's shop. Dennis looked at the bakery bag. I'm sorry. The words sounded real. That was the hardest part. I understand why you avoid conflict, I said. I understand that your body shuts down, but every time that happened, you left me with the bill, the work, or the consequence. Knowing why does not require me to keep living with it. He looked up. So that's it? Yes. Families make mistakes. This was not one mistake. I paid your insurance, your taxes, and your utilities. When my account was emptied, you refused to read the document. When my dog was used against me, you stayed beside the person doing it. His breathing shortened. I did not soften the facts. I am not coming back to the house. I will not share an account with you. I will not pay household expenses. Do not give Celeste my address or telephone number. Dennis gripped the bakery bag. She has nowhere else. That is not my responsibility. He stood there for several seconds. Then he placed the bag on the corridor chair and left. I did not take it home. The house key remained on my ring for another week. Not because I planned to return, because taking it off required admitting there would be no version of Dennis's apology that made the house safe again. On Saturday morning, I went there while he was at the pharmacy. My belongings fit into 4 boxes. Clothes, alteration tools, Evelyn's steel square, a framed photograph of Birch as a puppy. Nothing else in the bedroom felt like mine. Dennis returned before I finished. He entered the kitchen carrying a prescription bag and a cup of coffee. When he saw the boxes, he stopped near the counter. Neither of us started another conversation. I removed the key from the ring. The metal resisted at the split loop, catching beneath my thumbnail. I had to rotate it twice before it came free. Then I placed it beside his untouched coffee. The sound was small. Metal against laminate. Dennis stared at it. I lifted the final box and walked out. I did not need her confession. I did not need her to understand the damage or name it correctly. Her version of me could remain wherever she kept the other number she had altered. I was finished checking her math. The account was closed, the work was no longer mine, and whatever happened next would reach her without passing through my hands. 3 months later, I signed the lease on a narrow storefront 2 blocks from Thomas's shop. The front room had 1 large window and uneven flooring near the fitting platform. The previous tenant had painted the walls a color somewhere between beige and old oatmeal. It was mine. I bought a used industrial machine, a pressing table, and 2 garment racks. Then I spent $38 on a new presser foot for my home machine. The part arrived in a padded envelope. I installed it in under 4 minutes. The first seam passed beneath it without my thumbnail holding the fabric away from bench metal. I ran another line just to feel it happen again. My first private wedding client was a nursing assistant named Joelle. Her dress was modest, plain satin. No crystal towers, no imported trim. She needed the hem shortened, the bodice eased, and 1 sleeve adjusted so she could lift her arm without pulling the neckline. I measured the sleeve twice. Marked the hem with Evelyn's square. The steel edge remained cold and nicked. Machine oil still lived somewhere inside the old surface. White chalk filled the engraved numbers. Birch slept beneath the cutting table. When Joelle collected the dress, she moved her arm once, then smiled because nothing pulled. I printed the receipt. Labor. Materials. Deposit received. Balance paid. At the bottom, I signed Mara Vance. The pen slowed at the final curve. Pressure lifted. Then the line continued. Every dollar on that page belonged to work I had completed. No emergency waited behind it. No relative had already assigned it somewhere else. I placed the receipt in the register, rested Evelyn's square against the cutting mat, and turned the sign in the window from closed to open.